Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. Okay, everybody, welcome back to another week at the 4th Box podcast. Always happy to be joining you. Tonight, we are going to bring on another guest who we will introduce momentarily. Before I do that, and even before I turn it over to you, Pops, I'm just going to give you a quick shout out to remember, if you haven't done it already, to please follow or subscribe, depending on where you're watching this. Give us a like, share, etc., etc. It helps us out a ton. So, got a little housekeeping out of the way. I'll turn it over to you, Pops.
Yeah, great. Once again, welcome all of our listeners, hopefully around the country and elsewhere. We're certainly happy to have you with us tonight. Looking forward to bringing our guest in here in a few moments. Just want to give a shout out to everybody that's been joining us. We thank you for the support. As Bree mentioned, share it, like it, do all of those things, and keep spreading the word. We, again, are coming to you from our virtual Buckman Tavern. It's the place that patriots gather. I'm raising my glass tonight, and I have just a little bit of Scotch whiskey. I'm raising my glass in honor of all law enforcement, federal, state, and local level. And as part of that, I want to just give a moment of silence. We've had a corporal here at the Pennsylvania State Police down in Chester County, that's down in the southeast corner of the state, who was shot and killed on a routine traffic stop just a few days ago. So we're just going to give a moment of silence to Corporal O'Connor's and all of our best to his family. He has young children, or at least one, I'm sure, that I seen in the report. So okay, all the best to his family. We certainly support our law enforcement. Sometimes we think they're a little overzealous with the handing out of tickets and so forth, but these are the men and women who are out there with their life on the line, as was witnessed this week, just on a routine traffic stop. And it's a terrible, terrible thing to have happen. And we lost a 15-year vet of the Pennsylvania State Police. For the quote tonight, people don't realize how hard it is to speak the truth to a world full of people who don't realize they're living a lie. And that was Edward Snowden. I guess he's been kind of demonized largely by a big part of the legacy media for presenting information that they preferred to keep quiet. Another one with the underlying conditions we have since the onslaught of the war that I just wanted to mention come from Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he said, beware the military-industrial complex. I think that fits in with some of the things we see going on today. So with us tonight is a friend of the last couple of years, Nick Waddy. I've shared panel time with him on the Right Thinkers group up in Olean, New York. We have had some great conversation, great group of people up there. Always a lot of very thoughtful discussion. And that is my introduction, Bree, if you have anything else. And then we'll let Nick tell us about himself a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I won't say too much other than that Nick is a history professor at Alfred State College, specializing in European and African history, as well as military history, which I think is really going to come in handy here tonight, because we are, of course, going to get into the conflict that is currently ongoing in Iran. And I think that your background should provide some really interesting insights for this topic. So really curious to just hear your thoughts, but definitely happy to have you joining us. And I'll let you expand on that intro a little bit further if you want to just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got started with what you're doing today.
Well, where to begin? I was born in San Diego, California, a long, long time ago.
Taking it
We
all
won't
the
get
way
into
back.
exactly how long, but I've lived in Western New York since I think 1985. And I went away to Virginia for undergraduate. I went to Washington and Lee University in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley. And then I came back to go to the U of R to get my PhD in European history. And I sort of migrated into African history as well, imperial history, I guess you could say. And almost immediately after graduating, I got a job at Alfred State College. I think I was very fortunate to get, well, any job, but especially that job because it meant that I could continue to live in this part of the country and in Western New York. And that was great. I had a wonderful career at Alfred State, which is starting to wind down because now I'm semi retired. I only teach online. But for many, many years, every semester I taught Western civilization since 1648. So that's European history. Of course, there's a lot of world history built into that by necessity. I designed and taught a course called The World at War 20th Century Military History. So every year, we delve into especially World War One and World War Two, but of course we get into Korea, Vietnam, and other 20th century conflicts. And then I also teach a course called Africa in the West, which is basically the last 500 years of African history. But my knowledge of African history really comes from a European direction. So I know about colonialism and I know about um, the European presence in Africa, and I'm particularly interested in Southern Africa, South Africa, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. Um, so it's actually been a really long time since I did any academic writing. When I ceased to be a full time employee, I had to clean out my office, and it was really educational because I found all kinds of things that apparently I wrote and had long since forgotten about. But really, for the last, let's say, 10 years, really, it started with the first election of Donald Trump as president. I started to write editorials and I developed a blog and I began to make appearances on a local radio show on WLEA and WYSL called the new. Originally, it was the Newsmaker Show, and now it's the Newsmakers Show. Um, and through that, one of the right thinkers read my articles and recruited me to join the Right Thinkers organization and to be on the panels. And I've been on lots and lots of panels, and I've made so many great friends. Um, and I've continued to write those articles and be politically engaged. And well, I think that's pretty much what brings me here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. And I think if I recall correctly, at one of the intros that was done on the panel when I sat with you, let me see if you may have suggested the first time you became politically engaged may have been during the Reagan years. Am I correct when I and
That's true. Yep.
and and what pulled you? Obviously, you had an interest for a very long time since you ended up studying these things that have led to your career, and ultimately, I think a political perspective on those various studies that you completed. What involvement have you had? And secondarily, Nick, do you have any political aspirations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been drawn to politics. I've been fascinated by politics, and I grew up in an intellectual academic household where we debated political issues endlessly. Um, and I have thought about running for office. The closest that I ever came was sort of at the beginning of my academic career. I was on the Republican committee in Geneseo. And that didn't last very long because honestly, it was, I like the big picture issues in politics, national issues, international issues, constitutional issues. To me, those things are really important. And unfortunately, local politics is about getting signatures on petitions, and it's about choosing candidates not necessarily because of their ideology or their vision, but because of how many people know them in the community, or because they have their own money so they can pay for their own signs.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And the nitty gritty of how politics works on the local level, and honestly on the state and the national level too. There's a reason people compare it to making sausages. It's once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.
Hmm.
So that kind of cured me of any desire to not. No, I can't say that it cured me of all desire to run for political office, but it definitely put me off.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
didn't really like what I saw as a very low level insider. So I think maybe what I have to offer is analysis, writing. If I have a talent, it's writing, and I think I can use that talent to do a little bit of good. But I'm not sure that I'm the right kind of person to run for office or to hold public office. And I don't mean that. I don't mean to disparage people who do, because we need them. We need good people, smart people to run for office and to hold office. And honestly, most of the people who do that, I think, are thoroughly decent and mean well.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure I'm cut out to be one of them.
Hmm. Just a side note to that, Nick. I think I probably had mentioned up on the panel at one point or another. I stood for office down here in Elk County, Pennsylvania, and that was the office of sheriff. Of course, I'm a big proponent of Sheriff Richard Mack's idea of the constitutional sheriff being a significant piece in winning back all of those things that we're supposed to have, and they really push the local level. But to your point about making sausages and the things you bump into when you put yourself out there to stand for office, it did quite honestly put me off as well. But to your second point, we certainly do need good people. And Bree and I have talked many times about how important it is for politics to really begin at that local level and have a strong local uh, belief system in a community and spread that out from there. So we do promote that notion. But I do understand the point you're making, and that once you get up close to it, you really got to have a nose for it and a desire to be in there, because it is a little bit stinky, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Uh, the other thing I'd like to do, Nick, before we move into any discussion back and forth, and I think it'll largely revolve around the conflict going on in Iran, but how about since you mentioned your writings and stuff, and so we don't forget at the end of the show tonight, where can anybody that's watching find your writings and any other places you may post things, or how do people find this?
Well, it's pretty simple. The national outlet that I am most likely to be found in is townhall.com. So anybody who goes to townhall.com and looks up the commentary part, and looks up my name, Nicholas Waddy, they'll find all my articles. But an even better place to look would be my blog, which is waddyisright.com. Waddyisright.com. Very simple, very memorable. And everything is there. So I post reactions to what's going on in the news, and there's a page with every single radio appearance, every single article that I've ever written. So it's all collected right there.
And I think I may have encountered one of your pieces on World News Daily. Does that sound right?
Yep, but I really don't. I Something changed in their format, so that, yeah, I don't think I've put anything on there for at least a year or two, and I don't think it's very likely that I ever will again. But there probably is a whole bunch of my stuff there somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. I think I had run across something in that forum at one time or another. So,
Mhm.
okay. So, folks, there you have an upfront close look at Nick Waddy, who we're very happy to have with us here tonight. And we're going to begin the discussion tonight talking about the current war in Iran and what are your initial thoughts and where you think this is all going?
Well, I think I might shock and or scandalize you because I am in support of what President Trump is doing. Um, so my initial thought is that the objective here is to overthrow the government of Iran, which obviously is not very respectful to the sovereignty of Iran. But President Trump, rightly or wrongly, promised help to the people of Iran when they were risking their lives, taking to the streets, and trying to tear down the fundamentalist regime of the mullahs. That was, I think, about a month ago. He said help was on the way. And I don't think it would be right to promise that help and to offer that help without trying to give it to the people of Iran. So I totally acknowledge all the risks of undertaking this military action, all the costs on our side, on their side. And I think there is a good possibility that this gambit won't work. I think there's a good possibility that when we're done bombing Iran, maybe that'll be in a week or 3 weeks, or I don't know exactly when it'll be, but I think this operation will end without a U.S. occupation of Iran. And it may end with failure. It may end with the government of Iran surviving, which would be very unfortunate. But I think this is the best opportunity that we have had to rid Iran and the Middle East and the world of one of the worst regimes on earth, and a regime that has consistently supported terrorism since its inception and made a lot of trouble for us, and is directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of U.S. servicemen. So I think we had this opportunity. It's a shame we couldn't embrace it a little bit sooner, because that's when I think we had the maximum opportunity, when the regime was most vulnerable. It's recovered its bearings to some degree in the meantime. And that's why this effort may ultimately fail, but I think it is worth a try. And that's just one perspective on this conflict. That's basically the geopolitical perspective on this conflict. And I know there are a lot of other perspectives too, but I think geopolitically, it makes sense to do what we're doing.
So, Dad, I know you're going to bring up a constitutional point here, but before I do, what I would just ask you, Nick, is wouldn't you say that President Trump also made the people in America a promise first, that was we would not be going back to war? I mean, how does this new promise supersede a promise that is the reason he's in office again?
Well, you're right. He's an America First guy. He promised to, um, as much as possible, end foreign wars. He promised, in fact, in 24 hours to end the war in Ukraine, and he failed.
Yeah, good
Uh,
point.
um, so I take that point. I guess I see this. I don't believe we're going to have a long term military role in Iran. I don't believe there's going to be any U.S. occupation. I believe basically what we're trying to do is support the people of Iran in overthrowing their own government and determining their own future. We are the air force, if you will, of the Iranian opposition. And the question is, does the Iranian opposition have enough coherence, enough courage, enough unity to take over the country? And there's, unfortunately, only one way to find out the answer to that question, which is to try to help them help themselves. Um, so I get it. I mean, we don't want any more forever wars, but I don't think this is going to be one. I'm very confident that a month from now, and certainly 2 months from now, that the bombing of Iran will be over, and either we will have accepted that we failed and the Iranian government is still standing, or we will be an important partner to a new Iranian government, which is what I hope happens.
So, in addition to the promise being made about ending the war and not engaging a war, there were similar remarks made about changing regimes, which this largely appears to have been a significant reason for. There's also talk about nuclear ambitions that Iran may have had, although Tulsi Gabbard's testimony in front of Congress did not support that largely. So, it appears as though the administration has not presented a really clear and cohesive message. I think their messaging is terrible. And a point to that, which I think came out today, yesterday he said, hey, we've wiped out everything they got. We wiped out all their ships. We've wiped out their defensive mechanisms. And yet today, Haig says, indicates that the largest missile bombardment is going to take place. Well, if we had wiped out all of their defense capabilities, sunk all their ships, then what are we bombing now? And this only, to me, looks like more bad PR. It really looks like a tough sell when you say, hey, we've wiped out everything they got, but now we're going in and we're wiping out what? With the most significant day of bombing that's going to take place after it was announced we had eliminated their defense mechanism?
Well, that's a good question. I think my answer would be that Donald Trump says a lot of things, and much of what comes out of his mouth or gets on his Truth Social page is bravado. It's not well thought out, and it doesn't necessarily match what he said before or after. That's a lack of discipline on his part. And when you're at war or certainly engaged in very serious hostilities, you need to think out what you say more carefully than he does. And I take that point and I agree. It's a good question what exactly we are bombing, because we have some tough decisions to make in that respect, because we obviously want to degrade the military capabilities of the I think they're called the Revolutionary Guard, the core, the hardcore security forces of the fundamentalist Iranian state. But at the same time, if there is to be regime change in Iran, we need someone in the police or the military to switch sides and to pledge their loyalty to this new provisional government and to whoever is going to lead it and to take over. So we have to choose our targets carefully, because we don't want to kill the people who we're hoping eventually will help us build a new Iran. So how good is the Pentagon at discriminating between those targets? How easy is it to construct a new regime by bombing the old one? I don't know. We're kind of in uncharted waters here, and that's why I fully acknowledge that there's a good possibility that we'll fail. And a lot of whether we succeed or fail depends on the quality of our intelligence. And as we all know, the quality of our intelligence is not uniformly good.
Yeah, sure. So let me ask this follow-up question. And this, may be a bit of a reach, but obviously you spoke of the class that you developed at Alfred, and that involves a history of World War I, World War II. Now, you seem to think that this current situation is not going to involve much past a few months, but there are many people who are raising the alarms that we're knocking on the door of World War III. So coming from the historical perspective, what are your thoughts on that? Why do you tend to think that we're not headed in that direction?
I suppose it's partly because I think because Donald Trump is an America First president. And I think he's enough of a political realist to understand that the American people are not going into this conflict with great enthusiasm, even on the political right. Therefore, to prolong the conflict or to put boots on the ground would be politically unacceptable from his perspective. I think he realizes that that option is not on the table. And I think his advisors have explained that to him. So that's why I feel it's very unlikely to happen. And also, I think, as a matter of tactics and strategy, what a mess that would be to put American forces in Iran or to get us engaged in a long-term effort to reshape Iran by controlling the country, physically controlling the country. I mean, we've had that experience in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Does anyone want to go through that again? I don't think very many Americans do, and I don't think Donald Trump does either. I think the reason that this is happening is because several weeks ago, the Iranian people seem to be rising up and challenging the regime themselves. And thus, the United States and Israel concluded that there was a chance, again, the best chance we've had in 47 years, to overthrow this regime. Um, so, there are other reasons why a long-term conflict would seem to be unthinkable. One is the price of oil and the effect that such a conflict would have on the world economy. The one thing that the United States, the Gulf states, and Iran all have in common is that we all want the world economy, and including the world oil market, to keep flowing. We all need it to, including Iran. So I think when this conflict is over, whatever forces are in charge in Iran will want to get back to exporting oil, and we'll want them to do that too. So I think the effects of this conflict globally and on the United States will recede very quickly once it is over.
Hey, Nick, one of the things that you hear, I guess at certain levels is the play on the oil. Obviously, we were also involved with the snatch and grab operation in Venezuela, which I didn't particularly agree with either. But there was significant voices that suggested, that 20% of the heavy crude available in the world is in Venezuela, and this was a play on oil. What do you say to the voices that are suggesting we're putting ourselves in a position to control the flow of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz and the general Middle East, which we seem to be a little more friendly with? And then lastly, as part of that, what about the Israeli influence, which there's a lot of voices suggesting that there's a certain amount of Israeli influence related to this whole activity? In fact, I think it was suggested yesterday that it would be a collaboration between the United States and Israel as to when this would end.
Right. So the Israel thing is very interesting and is worth exploring in depth. But I've already forgotten the first part of your question. So can you?
Well, I think the protecting the Strait of Hormuz or taking
Right.
over the control of
Right.
the Strait of Hormuz
Yeah.
and the flow of oil out of the Middle East.
So I think the one thing that this conflict has taught us, and the Iranians, and the Chinese, and everyone in the world, is that we already control the world's oil supply. I mean, yeah, we can snatch the president of Venezuela, or we could bomb Iran for several weeks, but basically we, and perhaps Israel as well, but mostly we have the capacity to swoop down anywhere in the world and bomb any country and perhaps kill any leader or abduct any leader. So I mean that is an extraordinary amount of power for one country to have, and I think certainly a country like China will learn from this conflict that our military superiority over a country like Iran, which is supplied with the sort of weapons that Russia wields and China wields, our superiority is so great that basically the world oil supply and the government of Iran are at the whim of the president of the United States. And to a lot of people, that's scary, and maybe it should be scary, but it's a fact. So I think we were already living in a world where the United States could flip the switch on the Strait of Hormuz or the world oil supply anytime it wanted to, and still can. So, will that basic strategic reality ever change? Has it already changed? I mean, it may have changed in the sense that we don't know what, say, China's military capabilities are because they haven't fought anyone since the late 70s, and they certainly have never fought us. So there's only one way to find that out. But it sure looks like the United States is in a position of global hegemony in terms of its military strength. So basically, I think, as I said before, the interests of the United States and the Gulf states and Iran and China and Russia all coincide in one sense, which is that we all want the oil to flow and we all want there to be a free world market for oil that keeps the price reasonably low. And certainly that goal would not be achieved by a drawn out conflict that closes the Strait of Hormuz for months or years. I don't think we want that. And I'm pretty sure that Iran doesn't want it either, because that would be disastrous, much more disastrous to the economy of Iran than to our own economy.
Well, I was just going to say that certainly it could happen, though, right? I mean, like, I think that there is the potential there, and I think it's worth considering that side of it too. I also think it's worth considering that when we think about our capability to go into another country and maybe do things that are less than savory to its people, I don't think we can so easily rule that out happening here. Obviously, there's also talks of sleeper cells being activated, and I guess I'm curious what your instinct is on that. Do you think that's something that is a real consideration? Is there a real threat level there, or is that just noise, in your opinion?
Well, I think if you recall when we bombed Iran to try to destroy, quote unquote, its nuclear program, which may or may not have been destroyed, people said all the same things. People have been saying for a long time that you can't attack Iran because Iran has this fearsome capacity to retaliate through terrorism, through launching missiles, perhaps by building nuclear weapons, by messing with our forces in Iraq or in Afghanistan. People have been saying all those things for a long time. And I think that's one of the main reasons why Democratic administrations have not been willing to take that risk. But Donald Trump obviously is comfortable with risk and the raw use of American power. And he and the Israelis have exposed the weakness of the Iranian regime and the fact that their retaliatory capabilities are extremely limited. There's a reason they're firing drones and missiles at the Gulf states and at one of the stands, one of the ex-Soviet republics north of them, or maybe it was Azerbaijan. But at any rate, they're basically firing drones and missiles at secondary actors, people not even involved in the conflict, and who are certainly not attacking Iran. It's because those are the only people they can hit. Our defenses are so stout that they can't touch us, or they can touch us in a very, very limited way. And as we have pointed out, each and every day this conflict goes on, their retaliatory capability is reduced. So part of the reason that Trump made this decision is because I think he concluded, based on Iran's pitiful retaliation to previous strikes by the US and Israel, that the risks were limited. And I think in that sense, he was right. Now, to your point about World War III, the only way this could become World War III is if other major powers got sucked into the conflict. And perhaps the obvious one to take an interest in it would be China, because China is dependent on oil from the Gulf. But I think, that you see the Chinese criticizing our attacks on Iran, and that's understandable. Um, but I don't think you see them panicking. And I don't think you see them taking any particularly decisive action. They're certainly not doing anything to help Iran. Um, because I think they understand, as President Trump understands, that this conflict can't go on for very long. It would be economically infeasible for it to do so. So I think they expect that the oil will flow again in the foreseeable future, and I suspect they're right. So I guess I don't see a great potential for this conflict to spread.
Okay. I think that leads pretty nicely into the question that you had asked previously, Dad, about Israel's involvement, if you want to swing back to that.
My initial point was the Israeli influence. What's your position on that? There's a lot of voices suggesting we've been led by the nose into this by Israel. There's also suggestions coming right out of the administration that this will end as a collaboration with the United States and Israel together, deciding that. So what's your position on that?
Well, I think that there's no question that Israel and the Israel lobby are extremely powerful in American politics. And, you know, there's a reason that U.S. aid to Israel only ever increases, it never decreases. Because any politician who wanted to cut ties with Israel or handcuff Israel or reduce aid to Israel would be dead in the water politically. That's the reality. Or at least it's been the reality so far. I think a lot more questions are being asked about Israeli policy in Gaza and about the Israeli government now than would have been the case 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So maybe that's beginning to change. But I think Donald Trump is enough of a political realist to understand that to get ahead in American politics, you have to say that you love Israel and that you support Israel. And when Israel wants help or when Israel wants money, they tend to get it. So that's the reality of American politics and the U.S.-Israeli relationship. But so it's not surprising that Israel is a big part of this operation. And Israel has had a very long-running feud with Iran, and Iran is supporting almost all the terrorist groups and regional actors that have been a thorn in Israel's side for decades. Hezbollah, Hamas, you name it. Iran has had its tentacles all over the place. And so there's this long-running tension between Israel and Iran. And I think as much as it is in the interest of the United States to get rid of this regime in Tehran, it is much more so in the interests of Israel, or at least that's how Israel sees it. Now, of course, you should always be careful what you wish for in life because you might get it. And if there is a new government in Iran, no one can guarantee that it's going to be better than what's already there. It could be worse. But I think the Israelis assume that it's much more likely to be better. And so, given the close relationship between our two countries and given the fact that we share a goal, the overthrow of the government of Iran, it's not surprising that we're working together. That doesn't mean that Israel is determining our policy, but it does mean that the Israelis are deeply involved in that policy, which is both a strength and a weakness for the operation, if you will, because obviously the Israelis have all kinds of military capabilities that are useful if you're trying to degrade the Iranian military and political system. But at the same time, the Israelis are despised throughout the Middle East and in Iran. And therefore, to the extent that the Iranian regime can tell the people that the Zionists are trying to overthrow their government and the Zionists are trying to take over Iran, they can use that to delegitimize our efforts and to make us seem like pawns of the Israelis, whether it's true or not. And that might be enough to allow them to hang on to power. So I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that while Israeli military capabilities can be useful, Israel is a giant albatross around the neck of the United States as it tries to make friends in the rest of the world, and especially the Middle East. So that friendship is a double-edged sword.
So I don't know. I don't know if you had an opportunity to listen to Andrew Napolitano when he interviewed Scott Ritter, the former nuclear arms inspector, who's very familiar with conditions in Iran and throughout the Middle East, and has he's a pretty esteemed voice in that realm. And he would suggest that the guy who we went in there and killed was the one person who was committed to not building nuclear weapons in Iran. So that kind of, if that is true, and I think we always have to take with a bit of salt what we're being presented, of course. But he would also suggest, if you have an opportunity to listen to it, I'd encourage you to do so, that we are pulling munitions out of the Far East in support of the Middle East because of the depleted supplies with everything that's been shipped into Ukraine, etc., which now makes other parts of the world perhaps less stable or less safe. And a follow-up remark to that would be, if it is our job to take out people who either cry out for help or we have deemed them to be unsavory in our eye, did we just create a whole bunch of new countries now desiring to get nuclear weapons because we haven't messed with North Korea at all? And I would suggest that many of the same descriptions that we use for Iran are also present in North Korea, but we have not. And it really does give the view that the nuclear weapon kept us out of there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a reason why rogue nations want nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons in the world, the post World War II world, do exercise, at least up to this point, a stabilizing influence. And basically, if you want to freeze the strategic situation and make it unthinkable for anyone to attack you, you build nuclear weapons. I don't understand why the Iranians didn't complete and test a nuclear weapon a long time ago. I don't understand that, because maybe their capabilities have been exaggerated. It wouldn't be the first time that the U.S. intelligence has exaggerated a country's military strength or its technological abilities. But I would have thought the Iranian regime would want to have that nuclear card to play to protect itself from exactly what's happening now.
Yeah. Well,
And
Scott Ritter, if you listen to Scott Ritter, he would suggest that the guy who we just took out was the reason why they had never completed that. And
the supreme leader.
mm-hmm,
Uh-huh.
that's correct.
Well, I can't speak to internal Iranian politics. I don't know, and nor do I understand, and perhaps no one in the West does, their actual technical capabilities. So I don't know if that's true, but there are lots of reasons why the Iranians might hesitate to build the bomb. They might think, well, as we get close to building a bomb, the Israelis will know about it, and they'll rain nuclear bombs on every Iranian city, and that'll be the end of us. And that could be true.
Yep.
So there are good reasons for them to build the bomb. There are good reasons for them to hesitate. But whether any of those reasons are determinative or whether they just couldn't build the bomb, I couldn't say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm only suggesting what I personally would deem as a fairly significant voice in that arena who made that suggestion. I'm like yourself, have no other information other than what we can glean from voices like that. And Scott in that interview with Andrew Napolitano said that he was the guy that beginning in 2003 absolutely was committed. He believed it was against their principles to build that nuclear weapon. So whether that's true or not, they didn't appear to be in a rush to get to the finish line. So is it merely regime change because they're really threatening to Israel? I don't really think many people in this country consider them to be much of a threat to the homeland. So to me, the reasons for going there seem to have been initiated by something more than a threat to the homeland here. And that's where the whole conversation with Israel leading us into it. I think many people, particularly as we have spoke with Brianna and folks in her age bracket, are completely turned off by this. They think it's a complete betrayal by the Trump administration, and I'm not sure where we find a footing to argue against that.
Well, I think you're right in what you said at the beginning of this conversation, which is that the Trump administration has not explained adequately why we are doing what we are doing. And, one thing that I would criticize Donald Trump for consistently in both his terms is that he does not give primetime addresses. He does not speak to us from the Oval Office. He does not, I think politically that's dumb because it's a great opportunity for him to speak directly to the American people. Every time he does that, he scores points with the American people, not surprisingly, because it's the only chance he gets to escape the filter of the mainstream media, essentially. But he doesn't do it. And this is an instance where he really should have done it, because when you initiate hostilities with a reasonably powerful foe, and there's kind of it's unclear exactly what the duration of those hostilities will be, then you owe it to the American people to lay out the case clearly and concisely. And he really didn't do that. And that's deeply unfortunate because, perhaps he feels that no matter what he says, the media and the Democrats are going to spin it the other way, and they're going to get half the country to despise what he did. And he's probably right about that. But that doesn't mean that there isn't good reason to explain, at least to the other half of the country, why you're doing what you're doing. So I think that was a missed opportunity.
I think that's a fair assessment because it's very true that we don't know all the ins and outs and we don't know all the whys behind everything. But when you don't know, you leave the door open for assumption. And the assumptions are those of which we said, amongst others. We've certainly not covered all of them, but I want to take the opportunity to go back to what you said just a little bit ago in mentioning that you can't even get very far in American politics if you're not on the good side of Israel. And this is where that assumption comes in. This is why people think that way, because if you have to be playing into the hand of Israel, it's not a very good look. And is that not the antithesis of America first? I mean, if you have to be pandering to another country, their government, then you are not America first inherently. So I think that's why the assumption is now that it really has nothing to do what is a threat to the American people, but what maybe is a threat to another country. And I frankly am not interested in paying for another country's war and another country's interests.
I can understand that. I guess the answer to some of those questions depends on which channel you watch. Because if you watch Fox, and I don't, but I understand, I've seen enough Fox to know that they promote the U.S.-Israeli relationship, and they are not very critical about that relationship, as many people on the right are not. They basically assume that Israel is an extension of America. It's the 51st state. There's no distinction between the interests of Israel and the interests of the United States. There is, because these are two different countries and two different parts of the world, but a lot of people assume otherwise. So um, I agree with you that U.S. policy should always be based on what the interests of the United States and the people of the United States are. Um, but in this case, I feel that while Iran may not be a threat to the homeland directly, Iran is a major nuisance in the region and has been more than a nuisance in the last 47 years from the perspective of the U.S. military and in taking American lives, and mostly has gotten away with that. I mean, they were largely responsible for the killing of, I think, 200 plus Marines in Beirut in the early 80s. Um, they were largely responsible for the deaths of thousands of American servicemen in Iraq because they were stirring up resistance to the U.S. occupation in Iraq. They have a lot of blood on their hands. A lot of it's American blood. So this is a grudge match, not just for the Israelis, but I think for us too. And President Trump, again, as president, needs to make that case. He needs to remind the American people of what Iran has done to us and why changing the regime in Tehran is so important. And he really hasn't done that.
That kind of set me up for what I thought we would probably get around to at some point. And you did, as you mentioned, a lot of your background with support of the Constitution, which you know mine and Bree's as well. So, in my estimation, if I think things may have heightened over the last month that precipitated this assault on that country, but going into his administration, he knew that this was a possibility. Certainly, this didn't just drop into our lap. This is something that's been being talked about for a long, long time, as you suggest, 47 years. They've been a thorn in our side with taking of lives in the Middle East at various outposts and stuff. My position is this, and incidentally, there's a great article on Lou Rockwell today by Chuck Baldwin along the constitutional line. If you get a chance, check it out. But my point would have been this: when he got sworn in back a year ago, January, I think he should have done a couple of things. Number one, he should have went to Congress and said, "I want a declaration of war. I want a declaration of war against the countries that are flooding or facilitating the flooding of drugs, lethal drugs into this country. And I want a declaration of war against the countries that have been waging war against us since 1979 or thereabouts." And the voice of the people is supposed to make the decision on when we go to war. That's why Congress has the very distinct, unequivocal right to declare war. Now, once it's declared, he can do with that as the commander-in-chief of the military as he sees fit. But in my mind, it is very clear that the decision to go to war has to come from the voice of the people, i.e. Congress, even though we know Congress doesn't listen to us as we watch what's going on currently with 85 to 89% of this country in favor of some form of voter ID, and we're still down there with both sides playing politics over this thing when 85 to 89% of the country want it. They are not listening to us. They're listening to somebody else. So I've heard all the arguments about why we couldn't do that. They're going to know we're coming. They're going to be prepared. They've been prepared for a long time. Listen to Scott Ritter. They've been prepared for a very long time. If he would have declared or went to Congress and said, "I need a declaration of war," and Congress followed the constitutional path that is authorized, I would have much less of a beef with it. I still don't think it's up to us to go around being a police department. I wore the uniform and I discouraged my boy from doing it based on a broader understanding of the conflicts that we have been in, especially over my lifetime, and how those things came about. And I at one point I was encouraging him to go because I think it did a lot of good for me. But later on, as he got closer to that age where he could have been going, I absolutely discouraged him from doing it because almost all of these conflicts end up being bankers' wars. They're the side that ends up winning. And it's the common folks kids who end up getting their asses shot off on some faraway land, and it doesn't appear as if it was necessary. So I know there was a lot there. I do encourage you, if you get a chance, take a look at that thing by Chuck Baldwin today. It was a great piece. I just think he could have done it within the bounds that were established, and the people would have known up front that at some point this is liable to happen. And we would, if Congress would have voted that in, that declaration of war through Congress, it would have already been authorized by constitutional means.
Right. Well, I think as a practical matter, Congress doesn't declare war anymore, as you know. It hasn't, I think, since 1941. What Congress does is it passes authorizations of force. And it has done that numerous times after 9/11 with respect to Iraq and Afghanistan, I think. Vietnam would be an example. So that does happen, and that gives Congress's seal of approval to long-term American military involvement in different parts of the world. And does it really pass constitutional muster? Perhaps not, but it has become the way that our government operates in the modern age. So I think if President Trump had asked literally for a declaration of war, he wouldn't have gotten one. If he'd asked for some kind of authorization of force, that it sounds pretty vague what you're talking about. So I think he might have had difficulty getting that through Congress, especially given the fact that there's a filibuster in the Senate and the Democrats seem to be reflexively opposed to everything, and especially to granting authority or any kind of trust to Donald Trump. So I don't think anything like that would have been very likely to pass. So, am I uncomfortable from a constitutional perspective with the fact that the U.S. president can essentially bomb and or kill anyone in the world anytime he wants? Yeah, sure, I am. But it's a long-standing practice of modern presidents to use force pretty much anywhere and anyhow they choose. And this is something that we have to bear in mind when we elect our presidents. They're unlikely to restrain themselves from doing so if they think it's in the national interest, or perhaps even if they think it's in their own narrow political interests. So this is why the Democrats would say, they warned us over and over again, you can't elect this crazy man, Donald Trump, as your president, because he's going to go off half-cocked and bomb people willy-nilly. And that's what they would say he's doing right now. I believe he has a reason. I believe he has a good reason. But it is still an awesome amount of power, especially given the global hegemony of the U.S. military, to give to one man. And that's a scary thing.
And that's exactly, I would suggest, why the Constitution was written up the way it was, since it's going to be our sons and daughters that are over there. Obviously, the voice of the people is supposed to have an influence on that. And if he would have sold the need for that to take place, we have to do this and give very compelling reasons, and then win the voice of the people to say, yep, we are in agreement. Anything less than that, to me, is out of bounds. And if we're either going to live by the Constitution or we're not. And if we decide we're not, then the next set of guys in can completely redo everything that was just done, because there are no constitutional parameters.
I'm guessing he didn't do that because he believed, well, you don't ask a question if you don't want the answer. And I think he probably assumed the answer would be no.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to hear no, so he went ahead and did it.
Yeah.
And probably on the political assumption that it would work, and that once we overthrew the Iranian regime, everyone would have to agree that it was a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that will end up being the case. Maybe it won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can jump in, Dad, I just
Please.
wanted to kind of bring up the point that it really doesn't matter if it's Trump or if it's anyone else. And to your point, this is not a new thing. They've been doing this forever. But that's not really a good enough reason to keep doing it. It was the wrong thing when they started, and it's the wrong thing today. And until we push back on that process is not going to change. They can't keep standing up, and this is any candidate for presidential office waving their campaign around saying, I'm going to promise I'm going to stick to this when I get in office. Because as far as I'm concerned, every time any of them has ever done that, it says the United States Constitution on the outside, but the interior is blank pages, because they are not following what's on the inside. They're not following what's actually written there. So when they make that promise, it's void almost as soon as they make it, because of exactly what you just said. They know they don't have to abide by it because, well, we haven't been, so why would we start now? And that is not going to change without the pressure of the American people. So in this case and any other, I don't think just because we've always done it is a good enough reason to continue doing it.
You're right. You're absolutely right. That's why we have a constitution to resolve some of these questions before the fact. I think, again, to get realistic about it, the power of the presidency has been increasing for a long time, and the authority of Congress has been receding for a long time. And there does not appear to be any will in either of our two parties to change that, because basically, when there's a Democratic president, the Democrats want to increase the power of the presidency. And likewise, when there's a Republican president, we want that. Most Republicans want that president to do anything and everything that he can to push the conservative agenda. And I think our commitment to democratic norms and constitutional norms in both parties has eroded a lot. And I think all that we're left with, arguably, is power and the wielding of power. And I think it's probably leading us to a dark place from a constitutional perspective and from the perspective of our rights. But again, I don't see any powerful voices or powerful actors in American politics fighting against it.
You're right. Yep. Hey, I think, Nick, we could probably talk all night. I have a whole bunch of other things I'd like to discuss with you maybe at another time. We did burn through an hour already. I don't want to keep you past what we suggested. It's been a very very good conversation. I very much enjoyed it. I knew we would have a lot of thoughtful dialogue, and it's always good to see you. If you want to give a plug for any of your other work, Bree, anything else before we move along here?
No, I was just going to comment again on directing people to waddyisright.com, which we will share in the show notes as well, so it's easy to find. And yeah, just thank you, Nick, for sharing all your perspectives on everything. It's always good to have another person's insight on here to kind of bounce ideas off of with. So thank you for joining.
It's my pleasure. A great conversation. And yeah, there's plenty more to talk about. So anytime.
We'll have you back on again. I always finish up with a Bible verse. Nick, if you want to bear with me for just a moment.
Of course.
Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. And I tied that in tonight because, I'm a little bit opposed to what we've got going on over there. And that came from Matthew 26:52. Again, Nick, it was our pleasure to have you. Very much enjoyed it. I hope I get up to the right thinkers again here soon to share some more pleasant conversation.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And until next time.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Nick. Have a good night. Okay, everybody. So that was Professor Nick Waddy. I think it was a really interesting conversation for us to have because I know we don't necessarily agree with most what he said. However, there were a few things where there was some crossover, and it was kind of interesting to hear another person's perspective on what's going on. And I think it's important to have these conversations with someone that we don't necessarily agree with on everything, because that's how we keep the conversation flowing. And we've said that many, many times, that we can't always just be stuck in our own little curated echo chambers. So I'm glad tonight we were able to sort of expand this conversation, outside of just the two of us bouncing back and forth and riling each other up, because that can happen for sure. So,
all right. Well, until next time,
stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.